I would like to introduce you to the audience. So, welcome
Okay.
on stage, Elizabeth. Elizabeth inspires change by turning communication challenges into opportunities for growth. Her mission is to help leaders, teams, families, and children cultivate strong, meaningful relationships through open and honest dialogue. By creating environments where trust is built, collaboration flourishes, and everyone feels valued and heard, she lays the foundation for a brighter future. So that was the beautiful introduction of Elizabeth. So please occupy your stage, and I like the shade setup. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Yes, you can start your presentation.
Bullying is rampant. Mental health concerns are through the roof. Social isolation is on the increase. Absenteeism is just beyond anything that we're used to. And I used to think all of that was when I was in school, when I was a school teacher or when I was a school principal. I used to think that, those things only happen there. But what I've noticed is those same issues, those same concerns are showing up in workplaces. They're showing up in business and industry. They're showing up even with entrepreneurs who are having a difficult time having conversation with people. Think about the last time that you avoided having a conversation. Where did that lead you? How did that happen? And why would you put it off? So often that's what we do. We avoid having conversations with people. We think, oh, they'll get over it, or it'll be okay. Oh, I won't worry about it right now. And then what ends up happening is you lose credibility. You have issues with relationships with the people that you lead, or folks who are on your team, or your work department, or sometimes even in your family. These are conversations that we need to have. We need to be able to step out of our comfort zone to find out what's really going on. And of course, that's a place of vulnerability. And we're not always the most comfortable in our own vulnerability. But that's the place of stepping out of our comfort zone, of being able to be with that other person. And that's part of the 5 strategies of dedicated listening that I talk about. And we don't have time to do all of them today. But the first one is really to understand what's going on for that other person. And that doesn't mean that you have to be their therapist, or that you have to sit down and have a lengthy kind of conversation. But it really is that space of engagement, being curiously engaged, finding out what's going on with the other person. Because as we can go around in our business or industry or with our friends and family, and you ask them how they are, and they use that awful 4-letter word that we hate using and hate hearing. And that's the word fine. We say, oh, yeah, I'm fine. Oh, everything is fine. And we know full well that we need to be able to understand what's going on. Because oftentimes when a person arrives in their workplace, when they arrive as your team member, even in your friends and family, fine means that they're usually hiding something. And they're equally afraid about talking about it, likely as you are. So this is your place to be able to listen, to be able to be actively and curiously engaged about what's going on. And you might say, well, I don't know what to say to them. I asked them how they were and they said, fine. So tell me a little bit more. Like, I've noticed that perhaps, you're not being as productive as I've usually seen you be, or, you're not looking as cheerful and chipper as I've normally seen you. So tell me a little bit about what's going on. And typically that will be the time that you find out a little bit more about that person. So that way it's an opening it's an invitation into having an open and honest conversation. Oftentimes we say that, busy, busy, busy is always going to be there. We're never going to beat that game. But the one that we really need to be playing and engaged with are the people around us, because they need our help. They need to be valued, they need to be seen, and they need to be heard for their point of view. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to agree with you or that you're going to agree with them. And that's okay. But being able to listen, being able to hear, and being able to understand the other person's perspective gives you a new place to start a new conversation, to understand what's going on. And that might mean that, hey, when you're with your colleague or you're with an employee or a manager that you work with, or even in your family, you can say, okay, so how can I help you with this? What can I do to help support you? And when people feel heard and they feel valued, they're more likely to step into doing better, doing more, being more productive, because they're being seen. You see, so often in our workplaces these days, people just go into their cubicle or they go into their office and they shut the door and, they get on with whatever it is. But we're so inclined to be in that space of isolation because it seems easier to hide behind our desktop or our laptop or our cell phone. Cell phones are a really fabulous tool that's come around to help us, but they're also a place of death of hopes, death of dreams, and death, in some cases, people taking their lives for real because they don't feel valued, they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen. So they're diving into their cell phone to look for that virtual perfect world that you and I know really doesn't exist. So this is the time for us to be able to engage. And as I said, being curiously engaged. And with that, the second element that I talk about in terms of the 5 strategies of dedicated listening is being really intentional with your time. It's not so good. And we know we do it fairly frequently. We'll turn and we'll be on our computer and we'll be listening and saying, oh, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, yeah. And you're continuing to do something else. We need to stop that kind of thing and really turn and look at the person who we're engaging with and have that conversation with them. Whether it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or 20 minutes, it shouldn't matter. The piece about it is that we need to be intentional in that time, to take that time to put on those blinders and to really look and be with that other person. Because that's the part of value that seems to be missing these days, that intentionality of being with the other person. Because that time that you're spending with them, you're actually listening and you're understanding and you're being with that person. Excuse me. Now, having said that, when we avoid those difficult conversations, then what ends up happening is we lose our integrity with ourselves and with the person that we're supposed to be having that conversation with. We lose trust with them as well because they can't count on us being there for them. And the situation or the conversation that or the information that they're sharing with you might seem trivial to you, but it's something that is important for that other person. So we are encouraged, and it is our role to be really good listeners. Now, I know sometimes, we have people who come into our office or who are part of our team, and they always have stories to tell and so on. But that's part of their communication. You see, the behaviors that come up that we see are part of communication. So we have to be able to dig underneath that behavior, whatever that behavior is. And when we're curiously engaged, we can ask about it. So when I see you being angry or upset, tell me what's going on there. So that's an invitation again to have that conversation, to be able to negotiate and navigate through what the person is saying and what they're not saying. And that's why sometimes it's important for you to be able to say, so when you said this, which is really about paraphrasing, and that's part of really good active listening, because we're hearing what they're saying and we're saying it back to them so that they have the opportunity to hear it. Excuse me, and they're hearing what you're saying, and they're then feeling acknowledged and they're feeling heard because you've been able to paraphrase, you've been able to say their words back to them. And that's really important for people to hear their own words. And so when you do that and you paraphrase and you say, so when you said this, what does that mean? So again, it's another layer of being curiously engaged, of getting underneath what's going on so that you understand and that then you'll be able to have a different kind of conversation. So when you ask those questions, when you're curiously engaged, when you're intentional with your time, that creates a different kind of communication. In this day and age, we are so easily distracted by all kinds of things, expectations from business and industry, if we happen to work there, or colleagues, or emails, or cell phones, or messenger, and we're constantly looking at those things. I just heard a statistic the other day that said that we look at our cell phone at least 144 times in a day. That just blew my socks off. I couldn't believe that that was a statistic that was so true. And when I watch people around me, I see that kind of thing happening. But again, it's a distraction because it's easy to get away from the reality of what's going on. And sometimes some of the conversations that we have to have are really important to have them now. If we avoid conversations, what that does for us is it puts panic and stress and strain and worry upon whatever our life is already like. And we just don't need that additional stress and strain. If we put off those conversations, then what ends up happening as well is that person that you need to have that conversation with doesn't get the feedback or doesn't get the information or whatever it is that you're trying to tell them. And oftentimes, what happens with that when we avoid those conversations, it takes us away, but then it puts more emphasis on the conversation. So oftentimes, that ends up being a conversation that then is really much more strained and much more difficult to have later. If we step into having the conversations that we need to, in order to acknowledge someone, in order to ask them a question, if we feel that we're interrupting or so on, then we can start the conversation with that. I just need to speak with you for a moment. I need to be able to share this information with you. And sometimes in situations when I used to be a school principal, I would say to either a teacher or a student, don't worry, you're not in trouble. This is just something I want to ask you about so that I need some clarity. Or it's sometimes, a redirection. When I was speaking with a parent or I spoke with, a student or a teacher, I would sometimes start my sentence with, I've noticed that you've been doing really good things. And I'm very pleased for that. And thank you for making sure that you are continuing to do a good job. I have a suggestion for you in terms of feedback so that you're giving positive words of encouragement. You're acknowledging that work that the person is already doing. You're then stepping in with the second piece, which is the feedback piece. And then the third piece. And it's almost like a hamburger or a sandwich where you're putting in each of the layers of what's necessary to have for a conversation. And it doesn't matter whether the conversation is going to be one that's of a serious nature. if there's a particular issue or problem, you can still acknowledge the person for the job that they're doing. And then you give them a goal or an objective to attain at the end or the bottom part of that sandwich. So then that way they know that they've been heard, that they've been valued for their contribution, that there is some feedback that's in there, and then a place to go forward. And then tying all of that up, there's a place at the end where you use a call to action. Excuse me. So what will be a time when you say, okay, I'd like to follow up with you tomorrow or the next day, and you give a time frame when you expect to follow up with that person. And that's the other piece of having conversation as well, is knowing that you're going to follow up. And in that particular conversation as well, then you're following up, you're asking with a job that needs to be done or the assignment that you've given that person or the phone call or whatever it is that call to action was. And then you're following up to say, okay, so tell me what we need to do next, or give me an idea or an answer to the follow-up. Because if we don't do those things, then people don't feel like you're interested or concerned about them. And we're getting into a place in a space, particularly in business and industry, where absenteeism is through the roof. Mental health concerns are increased exponentially these years. And those are the areas that help people to come back to their place of work or come back to their office or their team or so on, if they feel valued, if they feel that you're listening, and if they feel that the work that they're doing is contributing to the bottom line. Because we can't expect productivity and we can't expect profitability if we're not willing to value the people who actually do the job. And that, again, is part of a courageous conversation, because we don't work in silos. People aren't meant to do that. We're meant to be connected. We're meant to have relationship with other people. And it really is important to do that. And one of the things that I suggest when I work with managers or when I work with leaders in business and industry is that I encourage them as well to do team building activities. And sometimes those team building activities for some people feel like, oh, well, this just seems like a waste of time, or, I could be doing other things. But the whole idea behind that is that it embraces the community that you're working with. Your team begins to create a different kind of bond, because our workplaces can't always only be serious work. We need to be able to laugh. We need to be able to have some fun with each other. We need to be able to create stories and friendships and have a good time, because life is far too short. And we're coming into, times where families are of a major concern, and so they should be. But, some people on your team or in your business and industry or even in your family, you're navigating that space with elder parents who you might have to be taking care of. You have younger children that you're balancing their schedules and yours, and you're trying to make everything work. And then you have the balance in your workplace with the people that you work with or your team. And so there needs to be some levity. There needs to be some time for you to be able to have some time, get away, go do something with your team that's a little bit out of the ordinary. And it might be a release for them as well. Because oftentimes we go into our workplaces, we go into our, whether we're an entrepreneur working with a team or we're in business and industry or even dealing with our family. And we're always trying to hold ourselves together and we're trying to make everything perfect. Well, this is a time now where we have to take action, take imperfect action, because it's better to take action than it is to avoid it. When we avoid conversation, It puts strain everywhere. And if you think that it doesn't matter or you think that people don't notice, they certainly do. Having those opportunities to have open and in some cases really courageous conversations. And the reason that I call them courageous is because you're stepping out of your comfort zone. You're in a place where you're a bit more vulnerable. It might be something that you're not used to doing either. And that makes it perfect because that's what you can also say in that conversation. So let me give you an example. I'm having this conversation with a colleague at work, and I say, you know what? This is difficult for me too. And it's not something that I'm normally used to doing in this particular place in order to share this kind of message with you. So I'm inviting you into this conversation. Here's how I'm feeling. And I bet that you're feeling a little bit awkward, a little bit uncomfortable as well. That way, you're setting a space for it's a level ground, it's a level space that you're inviting that person into. So perhaps if you're having a conversation with a family member, as an example, you might say to that child, if it happens to be a teenager, because they really are my perfect cup of tea. Teenagers are the ones where you're pulling your hair out, and they're managing as best as they can to keep themselves together too. So it might be, you might say to them, look it, I get that sometimes I yell at you and it makes me angry and it makes me upset. And I bet that it does a similar thing to you. So how about if we start something different? How about if we start a different kind of conversation with each other? Help me understand why it is that you can't do this. You can't put the dishes in the dishwasher rather than having them on the counter. Or you're having a conversation with someone in your office and you say, I've asked you to do this presentation or get this together and it doesn't seem to be working. Help me understand what's going on for you that you can't get this done. Is there something that I can do to help support you so that we can make this different? Because in that invitation into conversation, it opens a pathway to new perspectives, new understandings, and certainly an opportunity for you to have more solutions. Then that person that you're having that conversation with feels empowered to be able to come back. They feel like you've listened, that you valued their opinion, and that they're much more open to the possibility of being able to bring up more things to you, ask for more help or more suggestions or a different direction, or they become a valuable member who can contribute to profitability and productivity. Because we need those kinds of people and we need those kinds of things to be happening so that our workplaces, our businesses, our industry, and our families work. This is our time to step into those courageous conversations. This is our time to be with people, to invite them into conversation so that we can be way more productive, have better communication, have better relationships, have better community, and have better connection.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing. You have left us with a lot to think about. And yes, I'm excited to apply what I have learned from your presentation. and your passion for the your topic really came through and made your talk even more inspiring. So yes, we do have a question from our audience. Here is the question. So how do you integrate wellness and faith without compromising the integrity of either?
You integrate your faith by showing up fully in integrity, fully being the person that you are, flaws and all. So that means that, every time that you show up, that's your true self showing up. Because when you have your feelings and you're upset and what's going on in your life, and it doesn't mean that you have to, bring all your old baggage, but it means that you're a human being too, and that you have feelings and that you have whatever's going on in your life, and how you show up with your integrity, with your leadership and your humanness. That's really what attracts people back to you. And so I do that in faith because I happen to be a Catholic, and so I don't espouse it when I'm having conversation, but my faith leads my conversation when I invite people in, when I have conversation with them. Does that help?
Yes. So thank you so much for answering this question. I hope the person who have asked this question got the answer. So thank you so much for joining this last today Global Virtual Summit 2025. And please do join our next speaker sessions as well. Let's take a quick 20 minutes of break and we'll get back. Thank you and bye now.
Thank you.